Alright guys, so today we'll be going into Bayes Theorem. Like I mentioned earlier, I decided to just do this interactively because some of the details are quite tricky. I have to admit this one is a little more complicated than what we've looked at, but it still builds up from what we are familiar with or what we've learned so far, but it just requires some additional manipulations and derivations. Okay, so I would not advise you try to memorize Bayes theorem or Bayes rule. I've decided to use Bayes theorem here instead of Bayes rule. So I won't advise you try to memorize it. Instead, I would advise you try to understand the steps and see if you can synthesize the information yourself. So just after learning all this, pick up your pen and paper and try to see if without any aid, you can walk through the steps from first principles. What I mean by first principles here is starting from the unconditional probabilities, which are also known as prior probabilities. Starting from there, now begin to work your way into finding intersections, unions, and all that, and then arrive at conditional probabilities when you have to consider one event given that another event has occurred. Then from these conditional probabilities, you then obtain the reverse conditional probabilities, by by manipulating some of the probabilities and then arriving at the reverse probabilities. So Bayes theorem is a general expression for obtaining these reverse conditional probabilities, given you already know um, some other conditional probabilities that this particular reverse is based on. So we've looked at conditional probabilities already. Now let's begin to extend all those ideas. So before we start, I'm going to just try to ask some questions um, based on some of the things we've done so far. Just general questions about notation. All right. So let's start from. I'm just going to pull out this expression here. I hope you can see the screen. So with this expression we have here, okay. So I want us to tell me when we say P of R intersection B, what do we mean? What is R intersection B? The reason I'm asking this is I just want us to be very familiar with those notation and the interpretations, so that with that, as we begin to use this more, I mean, in the next series of steps, we will not. Once you see any expression, you know what it means. Yes, anyone? All right. So just not to waste time on this. When we say R intersects B, it means R and B. Okay, the events that R and B occurs together That's R intersect B. Okay, so of course, B means the probability of the event B. In the case of our roulette wheel, it is the event that the ball spins into the black pocket. All right. So the event of red, the event of getting the red, the event of getting the black, then the intersection is the event of getting both a red and a black. Now this notation here, when you say R given this, of course it means the event that R would occur, okay, or the event of obtaining an R, given that we already know that black or B as a code. All right. So the events are given a knowledge of the occurrence of the event B. So this probability is probability that R would occur given that B has occurred. Not just given that B has occurred, but given that we know that B has occurred. Because sometimes a lot of things that have occurred that can change our degree of belief in certain events. But because we don't know them, all right, we still remain on our prior probabilities. So you hear some terms like prior probabilities, posterior probabilities. We'll talk about posterior probabilities when we come to um, Bayes theorem, and we get to introduce the Bayes theorem. Now, all that we've been doing so far, we've been trying to get, uh, um, we've been trying to look at probabilities of outcomes without really considering maybe actual historical data. All right. So estimations have been based on just information about the number of possible outcomes we have in the for that event and the total number of possible outcomes for the sample space. And the only time information is introduced is when we are given information about a certain event that has happened. All right. Then we're not trying to, the probability we're trying to estimate here is not really trying to focus on that event that has happened, or maybe seeing whether to happen again, all right, or the probability of that event happening again. It has been on some other event that we had no history about, all right, and then obtaining the probability that those events will occur based on the occurrence of this one we already know about. Which, if you look at it, it seems like this is quite far from what we really do in data science and analytics, because here in analytics and data science, we want to look at historical data, all right, and be able to make sense out of the data. Then when you now go into either decision making or predictions, we want to use that knowledge and then introduce probability to model the uncertainty that lies in futuristic outcomes. So we are trying to, still continue to estimate that particular event, estimate the possibility of occurrence of those events. But what we've been looking at so far is like, you know, given that event, let us try to estimate the probability of another event entirely, whose history we are not considering. So how do we now work from here to the data science notion of you know of getting to know more about um, the the likelihood of occurrence of an event we've gotten data for, okay, an event that we already have studied historically. Now we want to go further to understand that event and predict future outcomes. So work from here and get back to the data science side of things and see how probability helps us to better make sense, not just of historical data, but to make reasonable inferences. All right. So I just needed to bring that up about notation. So with that, let's get started, with the ideas for tonight. So we've been talking about bets. All right. We've looked at different types of bets. We started with just betting on colors, on the um, on the likelihood, placing bets based on our calculation of likelihood that the ball will spin into a particular color of pocket. Okay, now we've also now looked at other scenarios like um, you know checking two colors together, like the probability that a B or red will occur, and seeing how very strong that probability was. And we now looked at other cases like probability of a black or even. Okay, we looked at so many scenarios. Then we began to look at conditional probabilities, where you're no longer just making bets based on calculated guesses, but you are being given information, all right, about a certain event that has occurred, and then you're asked to place a bet based on that information that you've just got. All right, so how do you go about this? Given this information that I now know of, what's probability or the likelihood that the bet I'm about to place is reasonable? All right, so we look at all those scenarios and computed the conditional probabilities. Now, we want to take the ideas further. Okay, so maybe the previous bet we calculated, you know, I think the previous bet was betting that given a black pocket, um, you're going to get an even. All right, maybe you lost that bet and you still continue to try your luck. Gamblers are persistent, especially when um, they make some lucky wins once in a while. You begin to feel like that luck will continue. Right now, we want to take this further. So we've calculated conditional probability of the event even occurring given that black has occurred. All right. So I think we did that in this walkthrough here. So we calculated the probability of E given that B has occurred. We got 0.556. Okay. Now, of course, we also checked the probability of R given that B has occurred. And of course, yesterday we got 0. I didn't remember to update all these ones here. It's supposed to be 0 because R intersect B is 0. R and B are mutually exclusive, so they don't occur together. They don't have areas of intersection. So you cannot compute a probability of red given black. You can't do that. All right. So this is 0 over this, and therefore 0 over this. Everything here is just 0. So we did all these ones. Now we are now looking at something else. Given that I now know the probability of getting the event E, that is getting an even, given that black has occurred, all right, um, how can I reverse the scenario using this information to now calculate the probability that a black would occur given even. So previously we found the probability that the pocket is even we already know it's black. Okay, so just in case you are just joining this class on conditional probability, let me um, let me interpret that better, or let me clarify that. So the croupier spins the wheel, the ball lands in the black pocket. Of course, you don't know where the ball landed. All right. So before you place a bet, previously in general probability calculations, you calculate the probability. If it makes sense, you place your bets. Then the croupier will spin the wheel, and then we'll check if you won the bet or you lost. All right. But now the croupier says, you know what? I'm going to give you some inside information. So we'll spin the wheel. It's going to a pocket. I'll give you a little information about where it entered. Then you place your bet. So the ball spins into a black pocket. And then she tells you it has entered the black pocket. What's your bet? Are you going to bet that the black pocket is even or odd? So you begin to compute. All right. So what is the probability that the pocket is even, given that you already know that it is black? So this is different from calculating the probability that it is even. You're updating that probability of even with the newly available information that the pocket has entered is black. So that reduces the size of the sample space, because now you're only going to be considering these black pockets. All right. So instead of getting the probability of even by looking at the entire sample space, now the ball enters black pockets. So what is the probability that what you have in the black pockets? I mean, that black pocket is an even number. All right. So that reduces sample space. Your probability has to be updated with the newly available information. So we've gotten a conditional probability, which is probability of E given B. Now, what if we get the information that the ball landed in an even pocket? So you see that it's quite the reverse. It initially landed in black. You place the bet that it's going to be even. Now it lands in an even pocket. The croupier tells you it's even. So are you going to bet that it is black? So you want to check now the probability of obtaining a black given that the event is even. You see? So in essence, what you're trying to do here, all right, is let me just copy this. We're trying to, initially we looked at the probability of even given black, but now we're looking at the probability of black given even. I remember yesterday when I was answering the frequently asked questions on conditional probabilities, I told you that these two probabilities are not the same. You're trying to get the conditional probability of E here, and you're trying to get the conditional probability of B here. So you're calculating two different probabilities. So this guy is the reverse probability of this guy. Therefore, reverse conditional probability. So with the information about this conditional probability, can we compute the reverse conditional probability? That is, given that I already know the probability that event E would occur, even B. Now that E occurs, can I make an estimate next time to bet that B will occur, given that E? All right. That is, on this next occasion that E has occurred, can I now place a bet that B would occur, given this E? So this is the reverse conditional probability. So previously B was known, okay, it was certain. It's not something that's going to occur. There's occurred already, and we're trying to get E. All right, but now E occurs, and we're not trying to get B. Can we work from what we computed here to arrive at what we have here? Can we do that? Let's explore. Let's explore. All right. So we'll be looking at the binary tree again. The probability tree. Okay, we'll be exploring a probability tree that we used previously. Okay. So like I mentioned, this is the opposite of the previous problem. You can see now that E is what is shaded here, unlike what we had previously. where B was shaded. We're trying to compute the probability of an E given a B. Now we're doing the exact opposite or the reverse. Sorry about that. We're doing the reverse, trying to get the probability of a B given an E. All right. So the notation changes. I mean, not the notation. The what's it called? The symbols or the letters are interchanged. So instead of trying to work out P of E given B, we're going to get the reverse, which is P of B given E. All right. So let's try to see, from the notion of probability tree, how can we, manipulate the probabilities to obtain this? Okay. You already know how to calculate a conditional probability. We'll look at, you generally consider a formula like this. Okay. So with this formula, you can calculate your conditional probability. All right. But what if you have no information about, this union this? Because R union B, R intersect B requires you to count the outcomes and all that. What if you're not given this information? All right. Can we use information based on individual probabilities and adding those probabilities together? Because at the end of the day, your P of R intersect B, okay, you can get this by doing some additions, So let's, first of all, using this formula, all right, so let's just use this as an example to think of what what's going on here. Okay, this is hanging. Sorry, did you say something? Hello. All right. So let's try to walk through. Get the formula for probability of B given E. Okay. So that would be this union this divided by probability of this. So probability of this union this. So the probability of the first union the second divided by probability of the second. Probability of the known event. Okay. So of course we know that probability of B intersects E is the same as probability of E intersect B. Sorry, did I say union earlier? If I did, that's a mistake. It's probability of B intersects E. So this is B intersect E divided by probability of E. So we should just use this formula, right, to compute probability of B intersect E. Probability of B given E to get the reverse of probability of E given B. But it turns out that you can't just be throwing around this formula and utilizing this formula. Okay, this formula is not very robust for what we have. For what we for different kinds of problems we need to solve. But it is equivalent. It is still very correct and equivalent to the expression we'll be getting to derive. It's still very equivalent. So let's use probability trees, to take the idea further. Okay, so we introduced probability trees in the last session. We looked at how you can use a probability tree to visualize your probabilities and conditional probabilities. So we also looked at the fact that you not only use the probability tree to visualize but you can also use it to compute probabilities. Okay, so using probability trees, we can, use the same probability tree from the previous problem. So, you look at this problem and think, it's quite a different problem. So should we not use, or does it mean we're going to use an entirely new probability tree and work out a whole new set of probabilities? You know, but of course, you can use the same probability tree that we have previously. It's still the same problem, the same problem space. And so we can work with this. So given this information here, or this probability tree, we can use this information to arrive at what we initially add here as probability of B intersect E. So because you might not be able to count B intersect E and then compute the probability, you might not be given this probability. You might be given individual probabilities. And remember that we're trying to get this reverse conditional probability from the other conditional probability E given B. So we need to make sure that that probability shows in this expression, so that if I've gotten maybe this particular conditional probability earlier, P of R given B, I can reverse the whole thing to get probability of B given R by using the value I got here. So I need to see in this equation, I need to see, one of the terms in the equation being P of E given B, because that's the only way to make sense to call this the reverse of this, which means given what I had previously, probability of E given B, how can I use that as one of the values to arrive at probability of B given E? I hope that makes sense. So this probability tree, remember what I explained yesterday, that we have the roots here. Okay, so basically the entire sample space. And so these are just unconditional probabilities because they are simply based on the entire sample space, no conditions attached. All right. So the probability of B is 18/38. Probability of red is 18/38. Probability of G is 2/38. Then we begin to see, other, we have odd and even events. Okay, but we now kind of branch them each from these three previous branches or parent branches. Okay, now we look at the odd case, we look at the even case. The probability of this odd here is not just P odd, it's actually P of odd given black, P of even here given black. This one is P of odd given red, P of even given red. By the time you are computing these, you'll be getting different results. So the P of odd you get here will be different from P of odd you get here. They're entirely different because you're dealing with different, sample spaces, or should I say sample subspaces. Okay, so each one is based on the information that the event in a parent branch has occurred. So each of this is based on information that event in parent branch has occurred, and we're trying to arrive at the conditional probabilities for that. All right. So from here now, you can now compute your P intersection, P intersection odd, P of odd intersection black and black, and so on. Now, we're trying to get the conditional probability, or we're trying to obtain an expression for the conditional probability P of B given E. Okay, of course, with the information we have here, or that we've calculated previously, you can simply check what is the probability of B intersect E, you write the value. What's the probability of E, you write the value. Okay, but I want to do this. Okay, I want to progress on these notions without any assumption that you already know B intersect E. Based on what we have just in this probability tree, let us obtain the value of P of B intersect E. So we use the probabilities that we already have here, P of B intersect E, and then P of E. So what are the probabilities we have here? We have the probability of black, probability of red, probability of green, probability of odd given black, probability of even given black, probability of odd given red, probability of even given red, and probability of 0 given green, and probability of double 0 given green. So these are the probabilities we have here. Can we use these probabilities to arrive at these other ones here? That's the goal. And so by doing that, we'll be using conditional probabilities now here that's conditional probabilities, which is all this information here, and these prior probabilities to arrive at the value of this reverse conditional probability. I hope that makes sense. So let's move on. So I've already mentioned the probabilities we have here. We have probability of B, probability of R, probability of G. These ones are called the prior probabilities, okay, which means the very base or previous or individual probabilities of individual events. All right, so these are called prior probabilities. Okay, in fact, the prior probability can also be probability of B or R or probability of B or G, as long as they are known already, as long as maybe from a probability tree you already know them, okay, then you can note them down. All right, then we get in this probability tree, we are also having conditional probabilities, that is probabilities of some other events conditioned on the occurrence of the prior events, conditioned on some prior event that has occurred, or some event that has occurred prior. Okay, so these are the conditional probabilities: P of O given B, P of E given B, P of O given R, P of E given R, and so on. Now, the ones we need to get get this reverse probability, P of B given E, we only need 4 out of all the probabilities we mentioned here. There are 8 probabilities here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 probabilities here, not 8, sorry, 1, 2, 3. So that's 8. All right. So out of these 9 probabilities, we only need 4 of these to arrive at this. We are going to be using P of B, P of R, P of E given B, and E given R, because we are just dealing with the events black and even. The reason why R shows up is because the second even here is conditioned on R. And since we're considering the event even, we need to consider all the places where even occurred. So based on what I've said so far, is there any confusion? Or are we following the progression? Okay. Just want to be sure that you guys are following. All right. So we have all these probabilities. It's just a build up, okay? So just know the probabilities. Then from there, start pulling out the conditional probabilities. So this binary, probability tree. Okay, this probability tree, we've obtained the probability tree, by looking at, the outcomes. So these are outcomes we've looked at. All right, or should I say outcomes or probabilities that have been provided for us. Sometimes you won't be given, the sample space or sample size and how to arrive at the probabilities. You'll just be given outcomes. Okay, you'll just be given outcomes. And so, how do you arrive at the various? You'll just be given probability values. So with that, how do you arrive at notions like union and all that? So remember what we did yesterday when we looked at this binary, this probability tree. So I'm using binary tree a lot here. I need to stop that. Sorry guys, I'm trying to do some adjustments here. Okay. So we look at this binary tree. This probability tree, and we got we saw this information, but we also saw how to compute these intersections just with the information or the probabilities provided. So what's A intersect B? What's the probability of A intersect B? We simply multiply this conditional probability by this probability. What is A prime intersect B? That is all the things outside A intersect B. We just take the conditional probability that we already know from the probability tree here and multiply it by probability of B. We do that for all these conditional probabilities, and we arrive at our results of the intersections. So back to what we're trying to compute here. Instead of trying to use this formula, or this is general formula for conditional probabilities. What if your B intersect E is not known, or what if you're trying to get a reverse probability from a conditional probability? We need conditional probability to show up in this equation. Okay, so we need to go from this intersection to the conditional probability. All right, we need to transform this, if I should use the language. So we need to transform this this probability of the intersection to an expression in terms of prior probabilities and conditional probabilities, because we want the conditional probabilities to show up in our computation of the reverse of those conditional probabilities. So with the information available now, with this information and binary tree, we now need to do some manipulations. So to find P of B intersects E, we need P of B, which is this information here, and P of E intersect B. Remember that your from that previous probability tree, okay, A intersect B, the probability of that is simply the multiplication of these branches. Multiply the probability of this branch by the probability of the parent branch. That gives you the intersection. All right, so just multiply each branch by the probability of each branch by the prior branch, and you get that intersection. So which means in this case, we are trying to get or arrive at probability of B intersect E, which is this numerator here. All we need is the probability of the black and probability of the even given the black. That's all. Okay, which means what we are going to have here in place of P of B intersect E is P of B multiplied by P of E intersect E given B. Why are we using P of B and P of E given B? Why not use this? Quick question, guys. Why not use P of B intersect E? Why must we introduce or force in P of B and P of E given B into the equation?
Multiplying probabilities together.
Okay, that's we are multiplying probabilities.
From the two branches.
Yes. That's part of it. That's part of it. Any other ideas? Why do we want to, express this in terms of P of B and P of E given B? Why not just, go ahead using this? So to answer that, I will answer that with a question. What is the value of P of B given E in this binary tree?
What is what?
What's the value of P of B intersect E? P of B intersect E in this binary tree. I mean, in this probability tree.
18.
Can you see any information about P of B intersect E here? Is probability provided? Let's say, we are not working with the roulette wheel. We don't have any knowledge about the roulette wheel. We're just given this probability tree and told to compute some probabilities. You don't know where these numbers are coming from. So you cannot do any gimmick to try to find. So you're just given this, all right? With this information, you already know that P of B intersect E is not provided. Therefore, you must get the value of P of B intersect E based on the provided value of P of B, which is this, and P of E given B, which is this. The connection here is P of E given B, right? Notice it is not P of black given even, otherwise black will come here and
Without
even will
that.
come there, all right? So the reason we are going to express this in terms of P of B and P of E given B is because P of B intersect E may not be provided. You need to understand how to manipulate probabilities, by just working from first principles and simply re-expressing certain terms based on the available information. So instead of doing this, let us use the information about the probabilities we already know that is already on this probability tree. So we have to re-express this in terms of those probabilities. Does that make sense? All right. So some of these things we are doing is still like, we are doing a lot of theoretical explorations. By the time we start to solve practical problems with these, okay, we'll start getting used to them because we'll be using all these notions over and over and over again. So we hopefully would have a project on this. So to a general project on probabilistic thinking, where you would work on, either a single problem or a couple of problems, but that problem would help you, apply all these principles and think critically to produce the results that you need. All right, moving on. So in place of this, we'll simply use, the equivalent of this, which is probability of black as probability of even given black. The probability of B multiplied by the probability of E given B is your P of B intersect E. So that gives you that result. That gives you this. Okay. So instead of using this from the beginning, let us just use the full expression from the beginning. P of B times P of B intersects times P of E given B. All right. Now we also need to express or to re-express this denominator. We need to re-express it in terms of the information available here. If I ask you very quickly, based on what you have here, what's the probability of an even event? What is P of E? Based on, is there any information for P of E in this probability tree? Okay.
We don't have probability
So
of
instead, what do we have on
we
this
have
probability
probability
tree? What's yes?
we have probability of big home even people.
Yes. Instead, we have probability of probability of what?
Probability of
What
B
probability
given
did you
E.
B given E, right?
Yes, yes.
No. What we have is E given
Oh,
B.
E given B. Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's
It is the child branch given the parent branch. All right.
yeah.
The latter given the former. So that's just what we have here. E given B and also E given R, which means we need to re-express this P of E in terms of these given, these conditional probabilities. All right. So everywhere E occurs, the probability of E would definitely be, the total probability of all the evens that you have here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Of course, you will not just try to add the two, because if you add 10 over 18 plus 8 over 18, that's 1. And we know that the probability of even in this diagram, in this roulette wheel problem, the probability of even was 18 over 38. So definitely there's not enough to just do P of E given black, P of E given red. You won't get the result. All right, so for P of E, we need not just P of E given B and P of E given R, we also need P of B and P of R, because these are the two parent branches where the even occurs. So we are going to calculate the probability of occurrence of these evens, that is conditional probabilities, and we're also going to probabilities of those branches where they occurred. So for P of E, we're going to be considering P of B, P of R, P of E given B, and P of E given R. Normally we're trying to just, what we're really looking for is probability of black given E, probability of black given even. Okay, normally you look at this, red doesn't even come into the picture. So how come red is coming here now? The reason why red is showing up here is because, one of the places where even occurred is on the red branch.
Yes,
All right. So you have red pockets that were also even. So we're going to be looking at those pockets that were both black and even, or red and even. What does that mean? Pockets that are black and even intersection, and or pockets that are even and red. What I mean by that, let us express that mathematically. We are looking at pockets that are both black and red, or pockets that are both, sorry, black and
Going to be
even,
black and yeah.
or red and even. Let me remove all the both here. Sorry about that. All right. So we're looking at B and E, or R and E. What does this mean in probability notation? Can we express um, this entire expression in probability notation? B and E, or R and E. What does this mean? Okay, very quickly. What is B and E?
I think it's probability of B intersection E. So
Okay,
probability
so
of
which
R
is
intersection
this?
E. Yes,
Sorry,
yes.
hold on. Let's do it one. All right, so that we are not. We are not ahead of ourselves. All right. So probability of this, right? B intersect is it not?
Yes.
Wally, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Looking at this, which is this, right? What next?
Yes.
So what's the next thing?
Then is the probability of R intersection E.
I didn't get that.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I said, well, I think we're adding is the probability of R intersection E.
You are adding it. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. That is this, right? Probability of R intersect E. So
Yeah.
what you have here is just this. Okay. So let me put probability of B and E, or probability of R and E. Even if I say probability of B and E or R and E, if I just do this, it still kind of makes sense, because that would be like, here we'll just try to keep a bracket. Okay, so we can just do this and do that at the end, and just remove this. Still pretty much the same thing, except they are not mutually exclusive events. If they are not mutually exclusive, you know, but of course they're mutually exclusive. But assuming they were not mutually exclusive, we'd have to subtract the we'd have to subtract the what? What are we going to subtract? We'll subtract the intersection of this guy and this guy, because that would be like a duplicate. But now they are mutually exclusive. So this is probability of B and E or R and E. Okay. So what that means is that we are looking at all the places where this even occurred. Probability of B intersect E plus probability of R intersect E. How do we get probability of B intersect E? We already know that from here, but we don't know yet probability of R intersect E. Actually, we still need to multiply the probabilities in the branches. But the whatever we have on this numerator would be coming in handy, at the denominator. So let's proceed. So the steps, we are trying to, we're trying to re-express this whole thing. This is general formula for conditional probability, but we want to show that this is, we want to show that this is a reverse conditional probability. And so we want prior probabilities and conditional probabilities to show up in this expression, so that we can work with individual probabilities based on information that has been provided. So we want that notion of information to information gain. We want to use that notion of information gain. We want that notion to be expressed in this formula. So the first thing is, we'll start with the numerator, right? So this numerator, all right, the numerator is simply probability of B intersect E is probability of B multiplied by probability of E given B, which means the probability of of this B multiplied by the probability of this guy here, of this conditional probability here, E given B. Then we put that in place of this probability of B intersect E. We put this in place of that. So instead of P of B intersect E, we're going to have P of B multiplied by P of A given B at the numerator. What is left now is to deconstruct this P of E, and it turns out that this one is even more complicated than this guy here. It was easy when you're checking the probabilities of B, R, or G, but now checking the probability E, not conditioned on anything, simply by using the information on this probability tree, it turns out to be a little bit of a serious uh, um, a serious case. So I mentioned earlier that you'll be considering the total number of outcomes or the total number of areas where that's even occurred. You'll be considering the intersections. So even occurred on this branch, even occurred on this branch. So what's the probability of this intersection of E and B, or the intersection of E and R? So that leads us to this addition here, which means or. We want to look at all the places where E occurred. And the only places where E occurred is where you have both black and even, or both reds and even. So where are the places where black and even occurred, or the places where red and even occurred? Because all the evens are either black and even, or they are red and even. All right, so the black and even is black intersect E, R and even is R intersect B. All right, black even or R even is now this plus this. The plus here represents all. So that gives you a probability of E. But it's still pretty much the same problem we had at the numerator here. We don't want to see intersection. We want to re-express this probability of the intersection. We want to re-express it in terms of prior probability and conditional probability. So we look at a branch, the parent branch B, and the branch E that occurred on that parent branch B, and we now multiply the probability of that B, which is prior probability, we multiply by the conditional probability, that is probability of E conditioned on the occurrence of B. We multiply that. In other words, we look at the two branches where E occurred, this branch and this branch. Then we multiply, this conditional probability 10/18 by this prior probability. We'll go to the second case, look at the branch where E occurred again, multiply the conditional probability here by this prior probability. That's essentially what we're doing here. So we do this plus this, and that gives us the expression for P of E in terms of prior probabilities and conditional probabilities. So that simply gives us a way of figuring out the probabilities based on the actual places where this even occurred. By the time you combine all the probabilities together, you get the total probability of that event E occurring. Does that make sense? So I think a possible mistake I'll say I made on this slide is I should have just made uh, I should have proceeded one after the other, so that we are not just seeing too many equations and getting confused. So maybe I should also try to check the other areas and correct those. So here I'll duplicate this, and I'll just bring them up one after the other. All right. I just noticed if you're watching this again, you won't be seeing entire window. So let me pull it. Let me pull it in. So from here, we can just progress that way. Okay. So let's go back. So just to make sure if you are going over the whole thing again, it doesn't really look. So the step one is let's work with the numerator. Okay. Remember, we're trying to re-express this formula in terms of what? Two things: probability and conditional probabilities. Probabilities, not probability, probabilities and conditional probabilities. So we want this numerator to show the probabilities and conditional probabilities, and we want the denominator to show the probabilities and conditional probabilities. That would give us the estimate or the value for this reverse conditional probability. So we want to, reverse. Reversing from what? We are reversing from a conditional probability. Specifically, we are reversing from E given B. Now we want to look at B given E. So we need to see E given B in this whole thing. So we start from the numerator. Okay. So the numerator is P of B intersect E. Okay. So let's work. Let's now express that in terms of the probability of B and the conditional probability of E given B. So we now replace P of B intersect E at the numerator here. We replace it with this guy. So now that we've done this, we are left with one daemon. Okay, we now have one daemon left, which leads us to step two. Step two now, we look at all the possible cases or branches where E occurred and simply take the intersection of those branches with the parent branch. So to get those intersections, again, we use this method here, the probability of the parent branch times the conditional probability of this new branch, plus, in this case here, the probability of the parent branch multiplied by the probability, the conditional probability of this new branch. Now that we have this total probability, we now substitute this P of E with this. So that now gives you this expression, which looks longer compared to this. It looks longer than this. And if you're wondering, why don't we just go with this? No, you cannot just go with this because you will not always be thrown, the probability of B intersect E. Given just the information you have on this binary tree, you can't come up with B intersect E without, manipulating the probabilities that you have here. Because the probability of B intersect E is not given on this probability tree. You have to work with information here to derive the value of P of B intersect E. So a general way of working with that is to now take them step by step and progress till you get to this point. All right. You don't need to cram this formula. Trust me, I don't even think I can remember this formula directly. I don't commit it to memory. Okay. But if I need to work with this, I start with first principles, and in no time I've arrived at this. It's as simple as that. So instead of trying to cram this, I don't even bother. I just start with what do I need. I know this formula, right? It's easy to remember this formula. This is just the general formula for conditional probability. But I recognize that we're trying to compute here the reverse conditional probability. So I need to get the base conditional probability. I need to have that in the expression here in order to see, in order to get this value, this reverse. All right. So starting from first principles, my first principles include the prior probabilities, okay, which is these first branches, and then the conditional probabilities. I just need to not start manipulating them. Get my intersection at the numerator here. I just simply multiply the conditional probability by the probability. That is the conditional probability of the relevant branch by the probability. I do that. Then I come to the denominator here. I consider all the branches where an even occurs. Check the, the multiply for each of the branches, multiply the conditional probability by the probability, and then add those two products together. So that gives me what I have here. Multiply the prob by the conditional probability for that first branch, do that for the second branch, add the two together. That gives you the total probability of this event, because it considers all the various places where that event occurred. All right. So with that, I now arrive at this. I don't need to commit this into memory. If you have a very sharp memory and you still have a lot of gigabytes or terabytes left, be my guest, put this in memory. Okay. But one thing about putting too much information to memory, especially things that you don't really need them to really get things done. You don't need to have them in your head to get things done. You need to understand them instead. If you're putting all of those information to memory, it kind of cramps the whole memory space. And when you have relevant information, it's like competition for space. Just like the way your system is behaves when your RAM is full, you know. So you see people that cram a lot of things and still end up forgetting important ideas. It's just simply that notion. Of course, it's not exactly the way I've simplified it, but you don't need to cram what you don't need to cram. You just need to understand. Sorry, guys. Okay, so with I was saying that you just need to know some of the foundational things, and then understand how to synthesize the whole thing to work your way through to get the more advanced things, right? So nobody would require you to pour out this formula. You can just simply Google this whenever you need this. All right, but understanding how we arrived at this now helps you. So why do you need to cram this when you can simply Google it? Okay, so you can either Google it or you can walk your way through the whole thing yourself, starting from first principles, which is always the best because it shows how much you've mastered that particular concept. So what we've done here is, we've gotten the reverse probability, the reverse conditional probability, B given E, by considering probabilities and also considering E given B. It is E given B we're trying to reverse, and so we're going to use that in the expression to get this reverse conditional probability. Now, all of this that we are looking at here lead us to some important things. Um, the concept of the first important thing I'll talk about is the concept of the law of total probability. So essentially, what we did at step 2 here to arrive at this equation, okay, what we did here simply obtain the total probability of an event. So sometimes you're not given the probability of a specific event. Maybe you're given conditional probabilities or intersections, or you're given some other probabilities of some other events, and you now need to compute a particular event. We can use the law of total probability, to arrive at this. So basically, what we just obtained, that's P of E that we got at the denominator. We simply got that by considering the product you know, of branches where that event occurs. Multiplying probabilities and conditional probabilities, adding them to that is multiplying that for each branch and adding them up. And that gives us this probability of the event even. And we can generalize this knowledge to any other thing. We refer to this expression as the law of I don't know if you can still hear me. Okay. I can hear myself now. So we refer to this as the law of total probability because it gives us, a way of finding the total probability based on the conditional probabilities in those areas where that event occurred, we can obtain the total probability of that event. So I hope you guys are with me. Does it make sense?
Yes, sir, I'm with you.
Okay. Wale's voice is sounding like, right, let me go and sleep. All right. So my internet is pretty unstable tonight. So all we just needed to do was find the ways in which the events could occur and then add them up. We add intersection here and intersection here, and then we write these intersections in terms of conditional probabilities and raw probabilities. That's it. That gives us the total probability. So this applies to any kind of event, any kind of event at all, where you're dealing with, or where you're going to be considering multiple other events. Okay, you can just arrive at the total probability for that event by re-expressing the equation based on, or by expressing it in terms of prior probabilities and conditional probabilities. Now, with this law of total probability, we are able to have a very reasonable way of, arriving at this probability of B given E. The total probability occupies the denominator here. Okay, so with this now, that kind of brings us to Bayes theorem. And in Bayes theorem,
Zion, come
okay,
to
if I
free
go
now.
to Bayes theorem, sorry, is that what? I didn't get that. Um, oh, so sorry about that. I I didn't know I was not presenting because I was just on the PowerPoint. All right, so I'll be doing this now. Thank you for drawing my attention to that. Okay, can you see it now? I hope you can see the screen now.
Yes, I can see it now.
Okay, so before we get to, we go into Bayes theorem, let us um, work with what we have already. Given all this information that we have, let us now try to find or work out the probability of um, B given E. Okay, so let's do that. I'll start first by copying this figure and pasting it back. Pasting it in Word so that it would assist us in our calculations. So I'm just going to paste it here. All right. Now we want to get the probability of B given E, right? And we're starting with this formula here, but we know that that is the reverse probability of E given B. And so we are really interested here in uh, we're interested here in seeing how to arrive at that based on that initial conditional probability. So the first thing we need to do is to compute this, the numerator. So you already know that the numerator is going to be this conditional probability here multiplied by this prior probability. All right. So we'll pull out this. And how do we get that? Remember, your P of B multiplied by
Divided by
your
the
P.
probability of E given B.
Yes. Okay, very good. Probability of E given B. So what is probability of B? We know that the probability of B,
That's the prior probability.
and what's the value for that?
And it's over 38.
So we have 18/38 here. And then the next thing I want to look at is not plus, multiplied, multiplication here. So what's the probability of E given B?
10/18.
So we have 10/18 there. So we have this multiplied by this. If you look at this, simply what this gives you is, what it simply gives you, 18 will cancel 18, 18 cancels 18, and so you're going to be left with 10/38, which actually agrees with our earlier results, because we previously calculated B intersects even. We knew that there were 10 places or 10 possible areas of intersection. All right. So when you divide that by 38, that is the intersection. So the probability of that intersection is 10/38. Of course, you can reduce this to lowest terms, but I won't reduce yet because we're still working with all these details. So let's now, we are done with probability of B intersect E. Let's get probability of E intersects, probability of just E. All right. So we start with, remember, we're starting with first principles. So we're going to first consider the fact that probability of E, sorry about this, um, so probability of E is probability of B intersect E plus what? Probability of R intersect E.
Intersection E.
Yes, thank you very much. And so this is the probability. Now it's probability of B intersect E. It is simply probability of this and this. All right. So we are just going to bring that here. Then plus probability of red times probability of red, E intersect red. That's probability of E given red. Now we already know that probability of B times this is 10/38. Okay, so we can just remove this guy. So this whole thing here is 10/38. What about this guy? Probability of R times probability of E given R. So let's come back here to the probability tree diagram. So probability of E given R is 8/18. This is different from 10/18 here. So we're going to have different results. The probability of red is 18/18. 38. So that's 8 over 18 times 18 over 38. So instead of 10 here, we should have 8. And that's the only thing that's different here, which means we're going to be having 8 over 38 instead of 10 over 38. So this is going to be 10, 8 over 38, and that gives us this. So what we have here, when you add these two together, you'll be having 18 over 38, which agrees with our earlier understanding that P of even is 18 over 38, right? Or in lowest terms, that is 9 over 19. So you see, pretty much we've been able to get this by by using by we've been able to get these values by considering them, expressing it in terms of prior and conditional probabilities. So now we can come back to this and chip in our results. Okay, so the probability of B given E is now going to be, in the previous case, we had 10 over 38, and now
10 over
we're going to be
38.
having
18 over
we're going to
38.
be having, yes, thank you very much. So 18 over 38, which of course, by the time you break this up, 38 cancels 38. Actually, both 38 and 38 here are at the denominators, all right, but they still cancel out because they are on opposite ends.
Yeah.
It's like saying 10 over 38 multiplied by,
You're multiplying it,
or
you change the direction.
yes. So this at the bottom comes to the numerator.
Right.
This one comes to the denominator.
So
Therefore, they
left
cancel out.
10 over 18.
So leaving just 10 over 18, which um, is like 5 over 9 in lowest terms. So that's pretty much how you work your way around that. So the probability of B given E is this. Let's see how it compares to the probability of E given B. We still add the same value, interestingly, 10 over 18 is what we have here. So still pretty much the same thing. But in many occasions, you will not be having the same values. The reason why we have the same values for most of the computations is because most of the events add equal number of outcomes. Remember that black has total of 18 outcomes,
Yeah, it
red
has
has
the
18
same. Yeah.
outcomes, even 18 outcomes, all the 18 out. So it's like too many equal number of outcomes. But assuming we didn't have
Yes.
the same number of outcomes, you see that the probabilities that we've been getting would have been differing, would have been getting different values for these probabilities. So I hope this makes sense.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, okay, how do we work around? Let me continue with Bayes theorem. So in Bayes theorem, um, we simply just bring up all of these ideas and put them together into one uniform expression that we can use to calculate any kind of probability. From Bayes theorem, you can get a conditional probability, you can get a reverse conditional probability, you can get prior probabilities, and you can get posterior probabilities. So what you know as a posterior probability, okay, before I go there, our discussion of conditional probability started with this formula, when we're trying to uh, um, work with the information on a probability tree to obtain this conditional probability A given B. But after we did that, and we were able to count the number of outcomes in A intersect B and get the probability of the occurrence of that event, and computed all this, we're now looking at a scenario where we want to get a reverse conditional probability of B given A. Okay, so how are we going to express this conditional probability based on this reverse conditional probability? based on conditional and probabilities that we already know. So the expression for this is what you know as Bayes theorem. Your Bayes theorem, which is pretty much the probability we derived earlier. The numerator is the probability of the intersection of B and E. All right. And then the denominator is the total probability, which is expressed by the law of total probability. The total probability of the occurrence of the events E, of the event E. By looking at this formula, how do you know which event this total probability represents? Just by looking at this formula. Let's assume we had different letters like X, Y, Z. And not all this familiar E, B, R. By looking at the total probability at the denominator here, how do you immediately recognize that this entire total probability represents a specific event, maybe Y or Z or X? How do you know?
So I didn't get the question one.
I said by looking at this, formula, the this entire formula, by looking at this expression at the numerator, the denominator, how do you know which event is represented by the entire expression? Remember that um, what we previously had at the denominator is P of E, and then we derived this. So by looking at this, how do you know it is P of E? That is, how do you know the event represented by the entire expression at the denominator?
Actually, if I understand what you're saying, we must have known that we normally multiply the prior probability by the conditional probability.
Okay.
So, for example, now if this probability of B is denoted as X, so we already know the next what we're multiplying it by is the probability of is the conditional probability.
Yes, that's correct. But um, it still doesn't really capture the what I want. Okay. I'm looking at, with the information you have at the denominator here, how do you know that it is talking about this specific event? Maybe B in this case here. We just have one event at the bottom here, but that one event has been decomposed or deconstructed into various other events that's been expressed in terms of various other events. So by looking at everything here, how do I deduce that, okay, the event we're dealing with here is B or is X or whatever, whatever it is we're looking at?
I think it's because we are dealing with the probability. We don't know the value of the probability of B.
Okay. Yes, of course, we
Um,
don't know the probability of the value. The probability of B, the value of that probability, which would make us want to get this expression at the denominator
yeah,
to represent this.
yes.
Yeah. But then by the time I get that full expression, if I show a stranger, how does the stranger know that it was B I was initially trying to calculate? Without telling them we're trying to calculate the probability of B, if the person just looks at this expression at the bottom, how does he know that it is B we're trying to calculate? Of course, in this case, in this example, what we're trying to calculate here, is the event E, which of course you can see from here, B given E. So we're trying to get the event E. In this case, we're trying to get the event B, A given B. So what is a given B, more or less? But here it's E we're looking for. So if I show someone and I just look at this equation, what do you think I was trying to get at this denominator? Which single event was I trying to compute by introducing this full expression? What will your response be?
I think I can't figure it out actually.
All right, no problem. So you know that if I look at this, I will immediately know that we are trying to get P of E. All right. So I know that we're trying to get P of E. But how would I know? I will know that because I'll be seeing, I'll be looking at the conditional
Oh, that's
probabilities.
true. That's
All
true.
right. I'll be looking at conditional probabilities. The conditional probabilities that repeat themselves tell me that it's actually E we are looking for. So we are checking all the places where E occurred by checking the conditional
Yeah.
probabilities on each of the branches. So I just look through this equation. I say, okay, where is the conditional probability? E given B. That's it. Just to be sure, I come here again to verify E given R. Yes, we are just trying to work out the probability of B. Okay, so for example, this probability of A given B at the bottom here to be probability of A times probability of B given A plus probability of whatever other events multiplied by probability of B given A. Once I see those B, showing up in the conditional probabilities, I know that we're trying to look for B. Here I see E showing up in the conditional probabilities. I know that we're trying to look for E. So this, formula is the expression for Bayes theorem. With Bayes theorem, you are able to find the reverse conditional probabilities. Which kind of helps you if you don't know every probability from the beginning. You just get the reverse probability based on information about the probabilities and the conditional probabilities. So you reverse the conditional probabilities by combining those conditional probabilities with the probabilities that led to those conditional probabilities. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I don't know if time will permit us to go by question. I guess we should just stop here. Let me just stop here because of time.